Hello, I'm John Paul and I'm here at RimmerBros today to fit discs and pads all round on this Discovery 3. We're going to use the upgraded discs for the V8, which includes changing the caliper carriers, but it's the same procedure for both and we'll show you them as we go round. Before we start on this vehicle doing the discs and pads, we just need to put it in a safe jacking mode. So the easiest way, put your hazard lights on, make sure all the doors and windows are closed, and then press the unlock and the Land Rover button continuously, simultaneously, until the suspension stops pumping, and then it's all ready to go. Before we get on with the job, we'll just raise the bonnet, lift the cover off the top of the brake master cylinder, which you can see here, and then just release the cap, just so that when we're pushing the pistons back into the calipers and the fluid then will eventually end up back in the reservoir, it doesn't squirt out and overflow all nastily. So that's the first thing to do. The left-hand front wheel has the pad wear sensor wire on it, so we need to remove that, and the plug where it connects is behind the plastic cover on the wheel arch. So first thing we need to do is just remove the outer wheel arch cover, a couple of screws each side, and then I'm just going to put it out of the way so you can see there's all these little tags here, so we just have to prise them off carefully. And then underneath all the plastic under tray there's a series of black plastic plugs, so you have to pull the center out and then remove the plug itself, and there's a series of those, and once they're out of the way, put that to one side, once they're out of the way we can then just pull down the cover for the wheel arch, pull it down like that, and then you can see the wire where it joins up, and we need to unplug that to obviously fit the new one. Here's the pad sensor warning wire here, so you just unclip it, goes onto the bleed nipple, and then just a series of little clips all the way around until you find it to the plug at the top, and once it's there, unplug it, and then we can put it out of the way so that when we take the caliper off and the pads out, obviously it's not going to get caught up in anything. To remove the caliper from the carrier, there's two M8 or two 30mm spanner size bolts, one top, one bottom, going into the slider itself. So you just need to get your 30mm socket or spanner. Now you will need a 17mm spanner, but they need to be really, really thin to get onto the actual slider itself to hold it. So once you've done that, then you take the top one and the bottom one off, and then you can remove the brake caliper, which I'll show you in a second. Those two bolts removed, which you can see the lugs where they bolt onto. You can see the two pistons there now in the caliper, and you can also see the warning wire, which you need to pull all the way through the caliper and discard that. And here's the pads here. So once you've safely either cable tied the caliper up or replace it on a tray that you've got there, we'll deal with the pistons later, then we'll remove the pads and the carrier. To remove the brake pads, they just slide forward, just two little lugs fit in the caliper carrier like that, down there, rear pad out as well, then they're out of the way. And then there's two bolts at the back. They're a double hex bolt for the caliper carrier to the hub. They're a bit of a funny size, so they're like a 13-16 Imperial, so if you've only got metric spanners, it's in between 20 and 21, so unfortunately you may well just have to go and get a 13-16 spanner or socket, and then it's just a case of get them on there, and they will be tight, so you'll need to give them a good old tap, and then once they're both removed, then we can remove the caliper carrier. Here's the carrier off now. Here's the bolt holes where it bolts into the back of the carrier. Now look, here's the bolt I was talking about, and it's a double hex one, not a single hex, so you will have to get the dead correct size spanner to undo it, and they do get very, very tight. So now we can take the disc off. To remove the disc, you use a T50 Torx bit into the retaining bolt, and then just undo it all the way, and then you can just slide the disc off the wheel studs. With the disc out of the way, you can see the hub there where the disc sits. It's just best to just get around with a scraper, just clean off any debris on there, so when the new disc fits on, it fits dead nice and straight. It'll just stop any judder or premature issues with the disc, so just make sure it's all nice and clean before you fit the new disc. To fit the new brake disc, just slide it over the wheel studs, make sure your retaining bolt hole is in the correct place, and then new bolt, and then get your T50 Torx bit, tighten it up, and then we'll put the carrier on. Because we're fitting larger V8 discs, we've had to change the caliper carriers. These are two that have been supplied by the customer themselves, so all we're doing is we're taking out the caliper sliders, make sure they're all nice and free, make sure the boots aren't split, clean up the areas where the pad shims go, fit the pad shims when they're clean, so they're all nice and free, and then it's time to refit it. So it's just literally a case of popping it back on, putting the bolts in. It's difficult for me to get around my head around there to see. Bolt it back on, and then we can put the pads on in a second. The caliper camera is now fitted. 2 bolts are back in place. Now they do need torquing up to 275 Newton meters, and once they're done, pop the pads in. So a little bit of copper grease on each end. The inner pad has the pad wear sensor on it, so we just need to fit that into place like that, and then we can fit that pad. My head might be in the way here. So once that's in place, we can then refit the caliper. Before we refit the caliper, we have to push the pistons back. Several ways of doing this. I mean, we've just got a fairly simple piston pusher back over a tool, available most places I'm sure, and you just push the pistons all the way back in, and while pushing these back in, it's pushing the fluid back through the hose up to the reservoir, and that's why we took the cap off initially, so that it doesn't make a mess. So just push those all the way back in. And once they're in, we can then refit the caliper. And the caliper back in place, the case of just putting our 2 retaining bolts back in, tightening them up, and then we'll thread the wire back up the way it was, plug it back in underneath the plastic cover, and then we can refit all the plugs in the plastic cover. So now the caliper's back in place, the warning wire's back in place, we can put the plastic cover back in, refit all our plugs and screws, put the wheel arch trim back on, and then that's it. The caliper bolts are torqued down to 35 Newton meters, and the wheel nuts are 140 Newton meters. Once that's done, we'll move on to the other side and do exactly the same. Now we're going to move on to the rear brakes. Same as the fronts, we're going to put some uprated V8 discs on it, so we'll be changing the caliper carriers. So the first thing to do is take the wheel off. We've chosen to show this side because it's got the warning wire for the brake pads, so it's just a case of unclipping it out of its little clips, and then follow it all the way around to the plug, unplug it, and then just feed the wire through, and then we'll take off the brake caliper. Because the warning wire disconnected, so I need to get a 13mm socket, and then just undo both the rear caliper bolts. So take those off, and then we can remove the caliper and get it out of the way. Our 2 caliper bolts out now, so we can move the caliper out. Just thread the warning wire through the caliper, the hole there, and then just place the caliper out the way, or cable tie it up out the way so it's nice and safe. Then we can remove the pads, and you just slide them, but they do get a little bit tight, so you might just have to get something to prise them out. So just slide them out. It's fairly tight on this one. Slide them out like that, and then do the same to the other one, and then we'll take the carrier off. We need to take the 2 bolts out the back of the caliper carrier now. Now these are a 15mm spanner size, and it's a multi-hex spanner rather than the single hex, because it's just that style of nut. So then you have to just undo those. They will be fairly tight. And just take them all the way out, and then we can remove the caliper carrier. It's now time to remove the brake disc. Now we're going to have to adjust the handbrake shoes run inside the disc, which I'll show you in a second, so we're going to have to unadjust those to get the disc off. So there's a little rubber cap, so if you just prise it out with a screwdriver, just be careful not to damage it, and then that shows us the whole way we can unadjust the brakes. I'm just going to spin that round and I'll show you exactly where that is. You'll need to rotate the disc and looking through the hole until you can see the adjuster. We'll show it better when the disc is off, so if you're unsure what to do, if you wait until that process, you'll be able to see what we're unadjusting before you actually do it. So once we've put a little screwdriver in there and we've unadjusted the handbrake shoes fully, we'll then need a T50 Torx bit for the locating bolt at the bottom of the disc. Take that out, and then we'll be able to pull the disc off. Now this is the disc remove. You might just have to give it a little bit of a tap around the hub so it releases some of the muck around the handbrake shoes, because it gets a little bit of a lip inside the disc, and you might just have to tap it and just turn it a little bit so it comes off a little bit easier. Now this is the adjuster we was talking about. So if you can see, when you're putting your screwdriver through the hole of the disc, you're actually turning that, and that unadjust the shoes, so the shoes go in tighter so you can get your disc off over the shoes. Before we fit the new disc, we just need to clean a few things up. We just get a screwdriver or a file and just scrape around the rim of the back plate just because the disc sits inside it, so if there's any loose rust in there it will catch on the disc and make some noise. Same again with the handbrake shoes, inspect them if they're okay, which these are. We'll just clean them up, get some brake cleaner, clean them up, and then we're ready to fit the new disc. So we've cleaned up the handbrake shoes, we've cleaned up the surface where the disc sits on the hub, and then we've put a bit of copper grease around the spigot to make it a bit easier the next time it comes to pieces. And then it's just a case of replacing the disc. I mean, just make sure that the locating hole for the securing bolt is in the right place. We've got a new bolt for this one, so replace that, tighten it up, and then we'll spin it around and I'll show you how to adjust the handbrake shoes. We're just going to rotate the disc whilst looking through the inspection hole until you find the knurled nut for the adjuster, and then it's a case of putting your screwdriver through the hole in the disc and use that as a lever to adjust it up, and adjust it until the disc goes tight so it doesn't spin anymore, and then you back it off a couple of turns, put your bar back in and keep turning the disc till it feels nice and free. So once you've adjusted up the handbrake shoes and then slacken them off a little bit, you just have to get a bar and the studs again, so just go careful, just spin it around. It's difficult with a four-wheel drive system because they don't spin that freely, but you'll get an idea whether it's binding or not, and you'll feel how it is. And then just replace the little plastic plug into the disc, and then we'll put the caliper carrier on. Because we've fitted the larger V8 discs, we'll need to change the caliper carriers. So these are ones supplied by the customer, so all we've done is make sure that the surface area where the pad shims fits is nice and clean, and we've copper greased them, and the two caliper sliders are free, the boots aren't split, and we've copper greased the sliders as well. So now it's just a case of we'll fit the shims and we'll fit the caliper carrier back onto its mounts. At this point I'm just going to push the piston back in the caliper, so whatever means you have to push the piston back. There's several items available, so nice and steady, make sure that's pushed all the way back, and then we can fit the pads and then refit the caliper. So now we're going to refit the pads, so it's just a case we'll just copper grease the slider lugs and just fit them into there like that. Then we can bring the caliper back down. Make sure you've not twisted your flexi so it's sat in the right area, and then replace the caliper. There's some new bolts in the box with the pads, so we'll just replace those. Tighten these down to 35 Newton meters. They're already pre-Loctited. So once that's back together, we'll just replace the sensor wire. I'm going to replace the new sensor wire now, so we're going to show you on an old pad. It's difficult to see while it's in there, but you can see the cutout in the back of the brake pad. There's a metal clip inside the plastic sensor, and that just slides in there, and you just push it in nice and gently, and then it just slots into place. You'll feel it click, and then we can refeed the wire back to the plug, making sure that goes around the bleed nipple, and then the individual little tags around the sensor wire are into little clips all the way up the suspension, and we've got little places all for themselves. With the sensor wire back in place, all that remains is to just give a quick visual check, make sure everything's okay, put your wheel back on, let it down onto the floor, we'll tighten the wheel up to 140 Newton meters, replace the reservoir cap, and then road test the vehicle.